You know, I've talked to you before about Ben Carson. I've watched a couple of his speeches. He kind of made the national scene when directly in front of Obama at a prayer breakfast, he tossed Obama under the bus right in front of him on a podium. And I got to applaud this guy, because what I like the most about him is the fact that he's unassuming. And he doesn't seem to have that normal arrogance and hubris that politicians have. He's not a politician. What he is a doctor, and he's a neurosurgeon, and he specializes in child neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University. He's a professor emeritus there now, and he's actually, I think he's retired from Johns Hopkins. But the point is that the guy is not a politician. And, you know, you've heard me talk many, many times about the fact that we are in a situation in which politicians have led us down these roads that have, for all intents and purposes, you know, endangered our nation, endangered our republic. And I truly believe that to be the case. I don't think for a moment that professional politics is free of blame. In fact, it's the primary reason why we're in so much trouble. Because the politicians are not interested in doing what's good for us. They're interested in getting reelected. And that, of course, is the problem, right? I mean, they've lost the focus of representing the people, and they have put all of their focus on what is it I've got to do to get reelected into this job where I can continue to live like a king. I have power, I have authority, I have reputation. And so I have read a number of pieces from Carson, and I've watched a number of his speeches, and I'm impressed with the guy. So I'm going to read you this op-ed he wrote, and then I'll give you my response to it. The title of this is a moment that defines courage. The direction of our country is not good. Lawmakers can prove their backbone by defunding Obamacare. It's the subtitle. He says, I have been interested in the political atmosphere of our country since my preteen years. It has been particularly interesting to observe the political shenanigans adopted by many of those wishing to obtain or maintain power. Fortunately, there have also been many who were truly interested in serving the people who put them in office. Looking at one's life, voting record, and words can provide significant insight into which of the aforementioned categories a political figure sits. In the 1960s, John F. Kennedy wrote a book titled Profiles in Courage, which was very inspiring as he examined the lives of individuals who had enough daring to go against the flow and make a real difference in society. As a young, very intelligent president of our country, he was faced with many daunting problems, not the least of which was an attempt by the Russians to supply Cuba with nuclear weapons, which would have been situated just 90 miles off our shores. Although there have been many attempts to rewrite the history of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the bottom line is that Kennedy had the necessary backbone to stand up to Nikita Khrushchev and avert an enormous detrimental shift in the power structure of the world while enhancing America's international image. Now, some readers are probably already irritated that I have said something positive about someone who is not a member of their political party. You got to love the honesty of the man. It is my belief that if JFK were alive today, advocating personal responsibility and patriotism, he might find his views at odds with many in the Democratic Party. Perhaps it is time to de-emphasize political affiliations and labels, and instead concentrate on the philosophies that define one's beliefs and actions. The direction of our country is not good, and we the people, not we the Democrats or we the Republicans, are in desperate need of courageous leadership guided by an understanding of our Constitution. Our divided government was formed by diligent men who had studied the history of governmental structure throughout the world and wanted to wanted to design a system that would not succumb to the temptation to continuously expand its size and scope at the expense of the people. An important concept was the separation of powers, with checks and balances among the three branches of government. It was a rather ingenious idea to invest each of the three branches of government with enough power to check unwarranted power grabs by the others. There is, however, a breakdown in this system when office holders are more concerned about their legacy or their re-election than they are about the proper functioning of government. Our founders were most concerned about the possibility of the executive branch seizing power and disregarding constitutional constraints. I suspect they would have been horrified to witness the manipulative and secretive strong-arm techniques utilized by the current administration to push through Obamacare. I'm sure they would also be shocked to see an administration that picks and chooses the laws it wishes to enforce, thereby diminishing the power of the legislative branch of government. The practice, in some ways, resembles that of the centralized government system that swept the Soviet Union, whose notorious founders wrote that it was sometimes necessary to force ideas on a populace that will eventually come to accept and endorse those same ideas. Similarly, our current leadership is certain that Americans will see the wisdom of government oversight in almost every aspect of their lives. If we are to pass a free and prosperous nation on to our progeny, it is imperative that the legislative branch of government exhibit the courage to exercise the check function it possesses. Lawmakers cannot be afraid that they will be blamed for a government shutdown if they defund Obamacare. They have the ability to separate the health care law from the rest of the federal budget and fund one without funding the other. In doing so, they need to make it abundantly clear that they are willing to fund the government and all of its essential functions, but they feel that Obamacare is detrimental to the future economic health of America. If the Democrat-controlled Senate reattaches the law, or if the executive branch makes the decision to fund Obamacare at the expense of other vital national functions, the electorate must take notice and act decisively in 2014. Many say that those who want to restore constitutional restraints are fighting a useless battle. But we must remember that freedom is reserved only for those willing to fight for it. I am confident that the people will awaken from their apathy and vigorously support whoever has the backbone to stand up for them. And that's the end of the article. Now, what I like about this guy is that he's a realist. But in addition to the fact that he's a realist, he's also not so ideologically, trapped by his own and trapped by his own need to please his party, or so set in a wrong path, knowing that it's the wrong path, but unwilling to change anyway. Nor is he completely fall into the Kool-Aid, even if he is a true believer. The guy is willing to look at both sides of the coin. And he's willing to give credit where it's due, while at the same point in time pointing out the mistakes that are being made. Now, I gotta say, this guy has spent his entire life in medicine, and I don't think anybody else in Congress has the experience, the first-hand physical experience of being in the medical profession like he does. So who is better to understand the medical system and the financial aspects of it and the treatment aspects of it than him. So I wrote this response, and I'll read it to you. It's far briefer than his comment or his op-ed. I said, this is a man I could have chosen for president. Much to the dismay of the liberal progressive front, it's not about his skin color. It's not about Obama's heritage. It is about the man, the mind, the political thought, the tone, the tenor, the strength, the insight, the wisdom, and the courage. As I've discussed in many shows, the Patriot movement needs a leader who believes and acts like he believes. When, and I don't mean if, I do mean when, this federal house of cards collapses, we need a leader who will fill the vacuum. Yes, he must be joined by a few thousand others who can step into the void. Yes, we need true patriots who will also act in concert in both houses of Congress. Yes, we will need a judiciary, legislative, and executive who are all focused on the goal of a better, greater nation ruled not by elitists and self-serving bureaucrats, but men and women of honor, integrity, ethics, courage, and most importantly, a belief in the design and genius of our system as created by our founding fathers. Is Dr. Ben Carson our guy? And I ask you that because you've heard me say many, many times before that one of the things that we must do is have a plan in place. As people who are self-reliant, self-responsible, interested in the future of our nation, determined to see it become again a constitutional republic, determined for it to be a place of liberty and freedom for ourselves and our children, that we have an obligation, like we prepare our families when we buy food or we, put aside some ammunition or bury some money, into the preparation of our own households. We also have an obligation to prepare in the event, and I don't say the unlikely event because it's not unlikely, it's almost guaranteed, that somehow or other this federal thing blows up. It either explodes or implodes, but either way, what happens is there's a void in leadership and government. And that, politically, cannot happen. It cannot exist. Because a void, a vacuum in leadership is always filled by tyranny and anarchy. The proof of that is what's transpired and is transpiring right now, although the press is completely ignoring it, in Egypt. It's what happened in Libya. When those nations, when their leadership was taken out, irrespective of what a monster that Gaddafi was, or irrespective of what a monster Mubarak was, and then the subsequent Muslim Brotherhood, who was no better. When leadership fails and a country becomes a failed state, the people who seek to restore it to a semblance of form that is other than chaos and insanity and anarchy have to be prepared and ready to step into place. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the failing of each of those countries. 33 million out of 85 million Egyptians marched to kick the Muslim Brotherhood out of their country. Now, you cannot tell me that that was not a courageous act on their part. We can't get 3 million Americans out of 315 million to even show up in Washington. We can't even get 1 million. And yet 33 million out of 84 million demanded a new government. The mistake they made is that they didn't have a pre-prepared, ready-to-go government of pre-qualified, pre-vetted candidates who were waiting to step in to the position of power and assert authority in a manner in which was productive and salvageable for the people. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I'm telling you. The Patriot organizations, the Tea Party movement, those that haven't been reabsorbed back into the political Republican Party, the libertarians, the constitutionalists, those people who have just basically given up on politics and call themselves the we don't vote at all because it's just all shamists. That's their party, right? Those people are all looking for leadership. And they're all looking for an ability to have someone and a group of individuals stand up and say, we are a party of people who will rule this crisis and put in place a constitutional government. That's what we want. Now, whether 30 million of us were to march on, let's just take the example and say 30 million of us were to march on Washington tomorrow and demand that Obama and his entire administration and everyone in Congress and everyone in the judiciary bail out. Pack your duds and go home. You got 12 hours. And let's assume, for argument's sake, let's just play the tape to the end. They do it. Now what? Now what do we do? Oh, now you get the picture. We don't have a plan of action. We don't have a pre-vetted group of 5,000 true patriots. True patriots who will stand up and for a short-term window, based on a physical legal agreement that they have signed and committed to, step into the role of legislators, judiciary, and executive until elections can be restarted, the Constitution can be restored as the rule of law. And what will inevitably happen in that scenario, without that pre-vetted, pre-approved, ready-to-go organization, is that chaos will ensue, and those who have the greatest authority will become nothing more than monstrous national thugs. If you think they're thugs now, wait till you could see what they would act like when they could suspend the Constitution in a crisis. Or the military would have to step in. We can't do that. We have posse comitatus, you say. Let me tell you something. You're blowing smoke, and you're blowing it out of the wrong hole. First and foremost, posse comitatus does not say that the federal military could not step in and regain control. It can. Number two, you're completely wrong about posse comitatus. And number three, what you don't know, and I did an entire show on this about a couple of months ago, and you can find it on YouTube or on our website, is that the federal government and the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, by a rulemaking that they posted in the Federal Register, have stated that if they do not hear from the president in, I think it's 72 or 48 or 72 hours, I've forgotten which one it was, they can step in and assume all military and political control of the United States and return it at the first available opportunity. No way, you say. I'm telling you, go look it up in the Federal Register. Now, does that make it lawful? No, but it gives them the plausible argument to say, see, here it is in the book. We've got proof. And your argument is going to be, well, what about posse comitatus? And then they're going to have somebody who says, yeah, well, posse comitatus ends at the point of this bullet. So, do you want to get out of our way? You get the point. So what we need as patriots is a pre-approved, pre-vetted, pre-qualified organization. 435 people who will represent the House, 100 who would represent the Senate or the 50 states, and a judiciary, a couple of thousand people to act in the judiciary roles, and probably another 100 or so to act in an executive role. Now, well, we've got thousands of federal agencies that would need leadership. Oh, good. I'm glad you brought that up. Because the first thing that we ought to do is get rid of every federal agency that is unconstitutional on its face. You didn't delegate authority to Congress to have them subdelegate it to somebody else called the EPA or the USDA. And in a crisis like that, trust me, the last thing we're going to be worrying about is whether some gas station owner spilled a quart of oil in his driveway and how many millions of dollars we ought to fine him to go clean it up. So what you really need to do is focus in on that which is the most critical to the survival of our nation. You know, if you were out and you were freezing and you were trapped in a mountain canyon passage somewhere and you had been camping and you had fallen and you'd gotten away from all of your equipment and you were abandoned and alone in the wilderness and it was cold and you had no fire, what do? Well, you wrap your torso and you keep that warm. You can afford to lose your extremities, but you can't afford your core body temperature to drop, because then the body dies. And in this case, you have to look at government the same way. You have to have and maintain the core body temperature. You've got to have an organization that is prepared to step in one solid block and say, great, we are now going to immediately restore order constitutionally, and we're going to put in place elections immediately to get appropriate elected, constitutionally elected individuals into these offices at the auspices of the people, not some dictatorial body. So I'm asking you, is Ben Carson the guy for the executive? I don't even know that he'd take the job. I mean, no idea. Never spoke to the man. But I sure like the way he thinks. And if there's one thing that I have found, it's in the last couple of years, as I look around me and I look at the landscape of all of the people who are involved in the political cast, if you will, I can't find or even point to one person, not even Ted Cruz or a Mike Lee or some of those guys, or Rand Paul or somebody, and say, I would be willing to march through the gates of hell to back that guy's play. Because I believe he's honest, ethical, a man of integrity, and a man of courage. And I think I might be able to say that about Dr. Ben Carson. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. Monday we'll start live on KUNQ 99.3. I'm sorry, not live. At 10 a.m. to midnight. 10 p.m. to midnight. That'll be on 99.3, Big Country 99. Country by day, Patriots by night. Yeehaw, sir! They're going to take off their cowboy hats around 10 o'clock and replace it with a tri-cornered hat from the Patriots. I love that. We'll see you then. Find us at americasvoicenow.org. Have a great weekend. God bless you all.